Welcome back to F River Club. I'm your host, Turfus. Today we're going to be talking about who the real fascists are. Because on Facebook, in comment sections for some of the pages, all of the pages I admin actually, inevitably there is a boomer, or just any regular conservative, honestly, but usually boomers, who start saying that Antifa are the real fascists. And they also say that National Socialism equals socialism, which equals cuck. And yes, if it might seem like this topic is a bit petty, it's not. It's not. This comes up constantly. Every single post where the topic is Antifa or Nazis or National Socialism or anything, it's immediately comments like the ones I just said. Okay, so here's an example. There's so many, but here's an argument I recently got into. All right, so the guy posted. We'll call him Nathan because his name is Nathan. The guy posted that video of Ronald Reagan saying that if fascism comes back, they'll call themselves anti-fascists. Yeah, that video. And I said that's retarded, obviously, because fascism isn't just any authoritarian ideology. It's a political party, a program, an ideology founded on natural law. And there's other things we'll get to, but Nathan here, excuse the mic being bumped, Nathan here says, dude, that's just like saying socialism is just a Russian political party with very specific beliefs. The ideology fascism was founded on the Italians, but has grown and expanded. Reagan doesn't believe liberalism is fascism in the literal sense. He's using fascism as a similarity to describe what liberalism has been turning into. So I replied, basically, no, that's fucking retarded. I'm not going to read the whole comment because that's kind of spurgy, but I gave him the link to The Doctrine of Fascism, which was written by Mussolini in the early 1930s. And in proper conservative fashion, we had a nice little argument, and then he said, oh, okay, I was mistaken. I'm kidding, he fucking blocked me. That's what they do. I said, you're wrong, here's a link, because I'm right, and then he blocked me. And by the way, he replied to my comment before blocking me, which means he replied so that everybody gets to see what I wrote, and his reply, and then just my name blacked out. So oh, you got me, you won. They do that every time. All right, so are Antifa fascists? All right, in order to answer that question, we need to answer the question, what is fascism? You know what? Actually, we have to answer, what do boomers mean when they say Antifa are the real fascists? Okay, so way back, and I know this is hard to believe, but way back, before I was a National Socialist, when people said fascist, called something fascist, I understood it in the exact same way that this dude believes it. Or understands it. So, when they say fascist, they mean just authoritarianism. It doesn't even need to be political sometimes, but usually it's used in the political context. So, an ideology or some loosely defined organization that is vaguely political that appears to be violent or authoritarian, they're fascist. So, that's obviously ridiculous. But people like Nathan here, when they're told what it means, they say, "Oh no, dude, it just evolved. It doesn't mean that anymore. It evolved." No, it didn't evolve. It didn't evolve. You're just using it incorrectly because you heard someone else use it incorrectly because they heard someone use it incorrectly because they were the friend of someone who was the granddaughter of a communist who lived in fascist Italy, who didn't understand how it worked or what it was, and then said the word. They were fascist. Didn't explain it, and now we're, keep doing that. It's like a game of telephone. You whisper in someone's ear, and they whisper that phrase without hearing it again and over and over and over again, and it just gets convoluted, and the message gets lost. So that's what it became. Not to mention, it's easy to blur the lines between what is and isn't National Socialism or Fascism or Nationalism or true right-wing ideals. It's easy to blur that line if you just throw words around willy-nilly, like fascism, which is a perfect example of it. All right, so anyway... are Antifa fascists? Let's see here. No. Antifa are some weird kind of anarcho-communist people of color, but I'll just call them colored people. They are colored people, anarcho-communist, rabble-rousers. That's what they are. They don't care about strength and unity. They don't care about military might. They don't care. They hate the government, but they want gives me dad at the same time. So anarcho-communism is self-defeating. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so no, they have nothing to do with fascism. Furthermore, real fascists, actual fascists, they came about as a response to democratic socialism, liberalism, and leftism. They were a direct response to it, much like we're seeing right now in America and all over the world. Well, yeah, besides Germany and Sweden, but you know, and the rest. But they were a response to the decadence and the decay, because this isn't the first time something like this has happened. We would be very foolish to believe that the time we live in is the first one where liberalism and democratic socialism destroyed a civilization. No, this is not the first time. It's happened before. And when it happened in Italy, Mussolini started fascism and wrote the doctrine of fascism and round up his black shirts, and they took over the government because they were a response to the very people who Antifa are. Like, before there were fascists, there were people like Antifa, but they didn't have that name. They were just even when they weren't communists, because communism wasn't the fad in early 1930s, not yet, or at least it was coming up. So they were just violent, disenfranchised youths who thought, oh, we hate capitalism, but we don't want to bother to read a book or actually think about it. So this guy, he's trying to be authoritarian, man. We want to keep our decadence and degeneracy. We would just, want capitalism to go away. It sounds a lot like Antifa. That's exactly what they did. And Mussolini and the fascists and the black shirts, they put a stop to that. So fascism, by definition, cannot be leftist. It can't. It's not possible. There's no getting around it. There's no saying, oh, well, the black shirts and Mussolini and the fascists, they were authoritarian and they were politically violent and blah, blah. No, they weren't. You know what's actually funny about that? Mussolini and his black shirts, they gave a warning and a public message to the government, or the leaders who were currently in power. And they said that you need to get out right now, because we're marching in and we're going to violently overthrow you. That's what Mussolini and the black shirts declared. We're going to come in and violently overthrow you, and we're coming. So then, to much fanfare, Mussolini and his black shirts, they showed up to the gates of Parliament, and Parliament surrendered. Yeah. So, I want to say that again, because I don't think you quite understand it. They said they were going to be violent, and then they weren't, because the government gave up. They didn't even do anything. So then the question is, all right, well then where does all the horror stories come about from about the fascists? Like, where did that come from? Well, it wasn't all just nose propaganda. Some of it was actually propaganda by the fascists, Mussolini, black shirts, etc. I'm not going to keep saying that, just the fascists. So Mussolini, the fascist party, like the actual Italian fascist party, it has a few fundamental elements to it that make it special, and it made it special even then, and particular. And it's what made Hitler start. He founded the political basis of National Socialism. Some of it was founded on fascism, and this is why. It's because, okay, so fascism has something called, Mussolini called it the myth. And the myth is not what you are. It's not even what you aspire to be. It's what others think you are. So the myth is, for fascist Italy, the myth is they stormed Parliament, they took the government over by force, and then they surrendered only after a glorious battle from which the fascists came out victorious. Right? So that's part of the myth. And this myth was propagated for quite some time, and it stuck. It stuck until Mussolini was finished, and at that point, the myth was dismantled, and then the truth came out, but then it was warped by the noses. But yeah, that's the truth. However, that's not to say that they weren't violent at all. They were violent. They were violent in the same way the Freikorps was in Weimar and pre-National Socialist Germany and the rise of Hitler. So communists, the Strasserists, and Hitler and the SA, and they all fought, and the Hitler side, which was the SA, it became the SS, won. Communists were dead. But before that had happened, the Freikorps, they marched through the streets and they patrolled. When anyone would call them and say, hey, we got a communist here who's trying to spit propaganda down our throats, or they're being violent, the Freikorps would show up and they would beat the shit out of them. And if they kept coming back, and if they were even more violent, then Freikorps would kill them. And that's essentially what Mussolini's black shirts did. However, Mussolini was not entirely a peach. It wasn't like Hitler and the SA and the Night of Long Knives and all that. Hitler was more nice than Mussolini was. While some of the horror stories about Mussolini and how corrupt he was, while some of that is nose propaganda, some of it isn't. Like, he didn't hire people who he could trust and who were loyal and who were clean, primarily. He liked to hire people who were corrupt, not because they were corrupt and he was that kind of guy, but because if they're corrupt, they could be blackmailed and strong-armed into doing what he said. It's what gave him total power. Unequivocal total power is the people who are below him could not betray him, because doing so wouldn't screw them over more than what they would screw him over. And Mussolini was eventually overthrown because of his choices. Not just the choices he made for the people to put in his inner circle, but the choices he made, the dictatorial choices he made. So not really a good idea. And another fun fact, actually. So the Eastern Front and the Western Front in World War II, they were both being fought by Hitler's troops. He had to split his forces, and that wore them thin, and it eventually lost Hitler the war. Well, the reason he had to split his forces is because Mussolini invaded Greece. And had he done that 2 weeks later, Hitler would have been able to win the war. Just if he had waited just 2 weeks to do what he did, Hitler would have won the war. But because Mussolini invaded Greece, he had to split his soldiers, and he couldn't fight a war on two fronts. And actually, Hitler was talking about this in a recording. In the if you go on YouTube, it's the only recording of Hitler speaking with his speaking voice. He talks about how it's not possible to fight a war on two fronts, and how he was doing everything in his power to prevent fighting a war on two fronts, and how he was glad that they got around having to do that at that time. Well, Mussolini, thanks to him, he ended up having to fight a war on two fronts, and that's why he lost. If his forces weren't split, if they could be where they needed to be when they needed to be there, Hitler wouldn't have lost. But that's way off topic. All right, so another thing that, regardless of whether they're boomers or not, I've heard Nat Socks say this too, and libertarians who like to call themselves fascist libertarians, though I'm not sure what that means. It's pretty laughable, actually. But a common thing that they say is that fascism puts the state above the race, and National Socialism puts the race above the state. They also say that fascism didn't care about having to deal with the Jews, and they say things that are just generally like that. They try to denigrate Mussolini for things that he doesn't deserve to be denigrated for. Like, Mussolini did make mistakes, like what I said with the troops being split thanks to him invading Greece, and he lost, by the way, Mussolini. That's a fair point, and the fact that he hired corrupted people, that's a fair point. A suppression of degeneracy wasn't the primary reason that some of the anti-degenerate laws were put in place. He just did them because that's what his base wanted. So if they didn't, he wouldn't have gone as hard as he did. But because they asked, he did. But so that, excuse me. So he's worth denigrating over that. Those are legitimate concerns. But Fascist Italy did have laws specifically for Jews. Jews weren't allowed to do business. They weren't allowed to own business. If they weren't kicked out, they were second-class citizens. So that's not true. Fascism took care of the Jews just fine, which is why Hitler and Mussolini were such good friends, and that's why, well, that's not why they're good friends. I'm sure they had their reasons, but that's why Hitler modeled National Socialism's political foundation on fascism, is because fascism worked, and because it took care of the Jews. Hitler did somewhat of a better job, but I'm not going to get into that. But so they had something in common, and that was it. As for National Socialism putting the race above the state and fascism putting the state above the race, that's a bit too boiled down. That's a bit too simplified. So National Socialism is a projection of the good and the greatness of the people, while fascism is a reflection of the might and superiority of the people. You see here? So that's why the state seems to be exalted more than the race in fascism. And that's why they're seen as similar, and that's why they muddy and mix and mingle National Socialism and fascism when they know it, when they don't even know about it, because they are so similar, but it's just a nuanced difference. So they both understood the truth. It's just fascism handled it in a different way than National Socialism did. So what started all this was, who are the real fascists and are Antifa fascists? It's pretty understandably clear now that Antifa and liberals and any leftist organization or person or even loose anarchist organization or communion, don't care what it is, if they're leftist, they cannot be fascist. Real fascists were not the politically violent and needlessly violent people that they're made out to be. Unless you think that violent communists in Weimar weren't worth taking care of, and that's needless. If you believe that it was completely needless for Freikorps to do what they did, then you probably also believe that it's needless for what the black shirts did. But I'm assuming that you're not that out of the loop. So, yeah, no. The Antifa cannot be fascists. That's just absurd. So that's the difference between National Socialism and fascism, and that's what's wrong with calling Antifa the real fascists. Maybe next time we'll talk about Democrats being the real racists. That'll be a good one. I'm Turpus, and this has been F Forever Club. Thank you.